Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om 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 Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, here we are again, continuing to read Srimad Bhagavatam. Thanks for watching. This is more than anything about purifying myself, so I appreciate people listening, because it's inspiring me to read as well. So I'll just jump right into it. We are now reading from Canto 4, Chapter 12 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, text number 1. The chapter is called Dhruva Maharaj Goes Back to Godhead. Okay. The great sage Maitreya said, "My dear Vidura, Dhruva Maharaj's anger subsided, and he completely ceased killing yakshas. When Kuvera, the most blessed master of the treasury, learned this news, he appeared before Dhruva. While being worshipped by yakshas, kinnaras, and charanas, he spoke to Dhruva Maharaj, who stood before him with folded hands." Text 2. The master of the treasury, Kuvera, said, "O sinless son of a kshatriya, I am very glad to know that under the instruction of your grandfather you have now given up your enmity. Although it is very difficult to avoid, I am very pleased with you." Text 3. Actually, you have not killed the yakshas, nor have they killed your brother, for the ultimate cause of generation and annihilation is the eternal time feature of the Supreme Lord. Purport. When the master of the treasury addressed him as sinless, Dhruva Maharaj, considering himself responsible for killing so many yakshas, might have thought himself otherwise. Kuvera, however, assured him that factually he had not killed any of the yakshas. Therefore he was not at all sinful. He did his duty as a king, as it is ordered by the laws of nature. Quote, "Nor should you think that your brother was killed by the yakshas," unquote, said Kuvera. Quote, "He died or was killed in due course of time by the laws of nature. Eternal time, one of the features of the Lord, is ultimately responsible for annihilation and generation. You are not responsible for such actions." Unquote. Text number 4. Misidentification of oneself and others as I and you on the basis of the bodily concept of life is a product of ignorance. This bodily concept is the cause of repeated birth and death, and it makes us go on continuously in material existence. Purport. The conception of I and you, aham tvam, as separate from each other is due to our forgetfulness of our eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Person Krishna is the central point, and all of us are his part and parcels, just as hands and legs are part and parcels of the whole body. When we actually come to this understanding of being eternally related to the Supreme Lord, this distinction, which is based on the bodily concept of life, cannot exist. The same example can be cited herewith. The hand is the hand and the leg is the leg, but when both of them engage in the service of the whole body, there is no such distinction as hands and legs, for all of them belong to the whole body, and all the parts working together constitute the whole body. Similarly, when the living entities are in Krishna consciousness, there is no such distinction as I and you, because everyone is engaged in the service of the Lord. Since the Lord is absolute, the services are also absolute. even though the hand is working one way and the leg is working another way, since the purpose is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they are all one. This is not to be confused with the statement by the Mayavadi philosopher that everything is one. Real knowledge is that hand is hand, leg is leg, body is body, and yet, altogether they are one. As soon as the living entity thinks that he is independent, his conditional material existence begins. The conception of independent existence is therefore like a dream. One has to be in Krishna consciousness, his original position. Then he can be freed from material bondage. That's a big one. 1 second. Still have a cold. Yeah, this idea that we're not independent and that by thinking ourselves independent of Krishna, our conditional existence begins and goes on. That is, that's pretty profound. So text number 5. My dear Dhruva, come forward. May the Lord always grace you with good fortune. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is beyond our sensory perception, is the supersoul of all living entities, and thus all entities are one, without distinction. Begin, therefore, to render service unto the transcendental form of the Lord, who is the ultimate shelter of all living entities. Purport. Here the word vigraham, having specific form, is very significant, for it indicates that the Absolute Truth is ultimately the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is explained in the Brahma Samhita, Sat Chid Ananda Vigraha. He has form, but his form is different from any kind of material form. The living entities are material energy of the Supreme Form. As such, they are not material, but marginal. I'll say that again. The living entities are the marginal energy of the Supreme Form. As such, they are not different from the Supreme Form, but at the same time they are not equal to the Supreme Form. Dhruva Maharaj is advised herewith to render service unto the Supreme Form. That will include service to other individual forms. For example, a tree has a form, and when water is poured on the root of the tree, the other forms, the leaves, twigs, flowers, and fruits, are automatically watered. The Mayavadi conception that because the Absolute Truth is everything, he must be formless is rejected here. Rather, it is confirmed that the Absolute Truth has form, and yet he is all-pervading. Nothing is independent of him. Text number 6. Engage yourself fully, therefore, in the devotional service of the Lord, for only he can deliver us from this entanglement of materialistic existence. Although the Lord is attached to his material potency, he is aloof from her activities. Everything in this material world is happening by the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. In continuation of the previous verse, it is specifically mentioned here that Dhruva Maharaj should engage himself in devotional service. Devotional service cannot be rendered to the impersonal Brahman feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whether the word bhajasva whenever the word bhajasva appears, meaning, quote, engage yourself in devotional service, unquote, there must be the servant, the service, and the served. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is served. The mode of activities to please him is called service, and one who renders such service is called the servant. Another significant feature in this verse is that only the Lord and no one else is to be served. That is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. There is no need to serve the demigods, who are just like the hands and legs of the Supreme Lord. When the Supreme Lord is served, the hands and legs of the Supreme Lord are automatically served. There is no need of separate service. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 12.7, Tesham aham samudhartha mrityu samsara sagarat. This means that the Lord, in order to show specific favor to devotees, directs the devotees from within in such a way that ultimately he is delivered from the entanglement of material existence. No one but the Supreme Lord can help the living entity be delivered from the entanglement of this material world. The material energy is a manifestation of one of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's varieties of potencies. Parasya Shaktir Vivideva Suryate. This material energy is one of the Lord's potencies, as much as heat and light are potencies of fire. The material energy is not different from the Supreme Godhead, but at the same time he has nothing to do with the material energy. The living entity, who is of the marginal energy, is entrapped by the material energy on the basis of his desire to lord it over the material world. The Lord is aloof from this, but when the same living entity engages himself in the devotional service of the Lord, then he becomes attached to this service. The situation is called yuktam. For devotees, the Lord is present even in the material energy. This is the inconceivable potency of the Lord. Material energy acts in the three modes of material qualities, which produces the action and reaction of material existence. Those who are not devotees become involved in such activities, whereas devotees who are dovetailed with the Supreme Personality of Godhead are freed from such actions and reactions of the material energy. The Lord is therefore described herewith as Pavachiddham, one who can give deliverance from the entanglement of material existence. So people, in the name of spiritual advancement, research material nature. And that is another form of lording it over material nature. If you know something about an object, then you can manipulate it. You can understand it, and then you cannot, if you're not ignorant of something, you won't be afraid of it, so that makes you feel good because you know something. So if you feel good within the material world, it means you're striving to be the enjoyer. Trying to get liberation from fear and ignorance for the purpose of your own happiness or peacefulness is a very subtle form of trying to be God, trying to be the one who knows everything and therefore be totally happy. That ultimately is the jnana process, and that cannot deliver one from the material world because of the reasons stated here. Because you're still trying to lord it over the material nature. You're still trying to be the Supreme Person, which is not possible. So that continues one's material existence, because that is the fundamental reason for the existence of the material world, is to facilitate the illusion that one is the Supreme Person, whether in a big or small way. So as long as one tries to be the master always, one remains in ignorance, basically, and one never comes to the platform of true knowledge. In this way, one has to understand that putting Krishna as the center is the actual solution, or making Krishna your object of understanding, your object to understand and to serve. And that's what we're reading all about. So let me continue. Text number 7. My dear Dhruva Maharaj, son of Maharaj Uttanapada, we have heard that you are constantly engaged in transcendental loving service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known for his lotus navel. You are therefore worthy to take all benedictions from us. Please, therefore, ask without hesitation whatever benediction you want from me. Purport. Dhruva Maharaj, the son of King Uttanapada, was already known throughout the universe as a great devotee of the Lord, constantly thinking of his lotus feet. Such a pure, uncontaminated devotee of the Lord is worthy to have all benedictions that can be offered by the demigods. He does not have to worship the demigods separately for such benedictions. And this is proof. Kuvera is the treasurer of the demigods, and he is personally offering whatever benedictions Dhruva Maharaj would like to have from him. Srila Bilvamangala Thakur stated. Stated, therefore, that for persons who engage in the devotional service of the Lord, all material benedictions wait like maidservants. Mukti Devi, or liberation, is just like waiting at the door of the Mukti Devi is just waiting at the door of the devotee to offer liberation, or more than that, at any time. To be a devotee is therefore an exalted position. Simply by rendering transcendental loving service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can have all benedictions of the world without separate endeavor. Lord Kuvera said to Dhruva Maharaj that he had heard that Dhruva was always in samadhi or thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord. In other words, he knew that from Dhruva Maharaj there was nothing desirable within the three material worlds. He knew that Dhruva would ask for nothing but to remember the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord constantly. Text 8. The great sage Maitreya continued, My dear Vidura, when thus asked to accept a benediction from Kuvera, the Yaksharaj, king of the Yakshas, Dhruva Maharaj, that most elevated pure devotee, who is an intelligent and thoughtful king, begged that he might have unflinching faith in and remembrance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Excuse me. Oh, this cough. For thus a person can cross over the ocean of nescience very easily, though it is very difficult for others to cross. And keep in mind that crossing over the ocean of nescience doesn't have to do with just when you die, you cross over the ocean of desires, material desires. That has to do with in this life too, becoming Krishna conscious in this life. Because we are constantly getting hung up in that ocean. So purport. According to the opinion of expert followers of Vedic rites, there are different types of benedictions in terms of religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. These four principles are known as Chaturvargas. Of all the Chaturvargas, the benediction of liberation is considered to be the highest in this material world. To be enabled to cross over material nescience is known as the highest Purushartha, or benediction for the human being. But Dhruva Maharaj wanted a benediction which surpasses even the highest Purushartha, liberation. He wanted the benediction that he might constantly remember the lotus feet of the Lord. This stage of life is called Panchama Purushartha. When a devotee comes to the platform of Panchama Purushartha, simply engaging in devotional service to the Lord, the fourth Purushartha, liberation, becomes very insignificant in his eyes. Srila Prabodhananda Sarasvati has stated in this connection that for a devotee, liberation is a hellish condition of life. As for sense gratification, which is available in the heavenly planets, a devotee considers it to be a will-o'-the-wisp, having no value in life. Yogis endeavor to control the senses, but for a devotee controlling the senses is no difficulty at all. The senses are compared to serpents, but for a devotee the serpent's poisoned teeth are broken. Thus Srila Prabodhananda Sarasvati has analyzed all kinds of benedictions available in this world, and has clearly declared that for a pure devotee they are all of no significance. Dhruva Maharaj was also a Mahabhagavata, or a first-class pure devotee, and his intelligence was very great, Mahamatihi. Unless one is very intelligent, one cannot take to devotional service or Krishna consciousness. Naturally, anyone who is a first-class devotee must be a first-class intelligent person, and therefore not interested in any kind of benediction within this material world. Dhruva Maharaj was offered a benediction by the king of the kings, Kuvera, the treasurer of the demigods, whose only business is to supply immense riches to persons within this material world. Is described as the king of kings because unless one is blessed by Kuvera, one cannot become a king. The king of kings personally offered Dhruva Maharaj any amount of riches, but he declined to accept them. He is described therefore as Mahamatihi, very thoughtful or highly intellectual. Okay, text number 9. Translation. The son of Idavida, Lord Kuvera, was very pleased and happily gave Dhruva Maharaj the benediction he wanted. Thereafter he disappeared from Dhruva's presence, and Dhruva Maharaj returned to his capital city. Purport. Kuvera, who is known as the son of Idavida, was very pleased with Dhruva Maharaj because he did not ask him for anything materially enjoyable. Kuvera is one of the demigods, so one may put forward the argument, quote, why did Dhruva Maharaj take a benediction from a demigod? The answer is that for a Vaishnava there is no objection to taking a benediction from a demigod if it is favorable for advancing Krishna consciousness. The gopis, for example, worshipped Katyayani, a demigoddess, but the only benediction they wanted from the goddess was to have Krishna as their husband. A Vaishnava is not interested in asking any benediction from the demigods, nor is he interested in asking benedictions from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is said in the Bhagavatam that liberation can be offered by the Supreme Person, but even if a pure devotee is offered liberation by the Supreme Lord, he refuses to accept it. Dhruva Maharaj did not ask Kuvera for transference to the spiritual world, which is called liberation. He simply asked that wherever he would remain, whether in the spiritual or the material world, he would always remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A Vaishnava is always respectful to everyone, so when Kuvera offered him a benediction, he did not refuse it. But he wanted something which would be favorable to his advancement in Krishna consciousness. Text 10. Translation. As long as he remained at home, Dhruva Maharaj performed many great ceremonial sacrifices in order to please the enjoyer of all sacrifices, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prescribed ceremonial sacrifices are especially meant to please Lord Vishnu, who is the objective of all such sacrifices, and who awards the resultant benedictions. Report. In Bhagavad Gita 3.9 it is said, Yagyartat karmano nyatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha. One should act or work only in order to please the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, one becomes entangled in the resultant reactions. According to the 4 divisions of Varna and Ashrama, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas are especially advised to perform great ceremonial sacrifices and to distribute their accumulated money very liberally. Dhruva Maharaj, as a king, an ideal Kshatriya, performed many such sacrifices, giving very liberally in charity. Kshatriyas and Vaishyas are supposed to earn their money and accumulate great riches. Sometimes they do it by acting sinfully. Kshatriyas are meant to rule over a country. Dhruva Maharaj, for example, in the course of ruling had to fight and kill many yakshas. Such action is necessary for Kshatriyas. My coughing is getting through the microphone, isn't it? Sorry. I'll try to turn it off next time. Such action is necessary for Kshatriyas. A Kshatriya should not be a coward, and he should not be non-violent. To rule over the country, he has to act violently. Kshatriyas and Vaishyas are therefore especially advised to give in charity at least 50% of their accumulated wealth. Wow, 50%. That's interesting. Let me just talk about this for a second, because that's fascinating. So, like, when you read Krishna book, Krishna and Balaram, they go out and they battle, and they kill the other soldiers, and back in those times, people would go out heavily decorated with gold helmets and golden armor and jewels and golden chariots, and they'd bring a lot of riches onto the battlefield. And so when they were killed, the Kshatriya kings would then take the loot. They would take all the loot back with them. So that's one way that Kshatriyas would get money. The other way is that Kshatriyas collect taxes. And I've read, and I don't know exactly where, I think maybe first canto, Srila Prabhupada says that the Kshatriyas are allowed to take 25% tax rate. So flat tax, everybody should give 25% of whatever they make, whether they have stocks of grain or ghee or gold or whatever kind of thing they do, they should give 25% of that to the king, or the king has a right to take it, kind of thing. Now, what's interesting, if you put that in perspective of what Prabhupada is just saying here, that the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas are advised to give in charity at least 50% of their accumulated wealth. So that money that they collect in taxes, obviously they use that to maintain their state and this and that. But then anything extra, 50%. Ooh, that's a lot. So, the government should be giving in charity, in other words. And I guess you could say that is what, government programs are all about. And the Bhagavatam does advise to have a welfare state in this way. But the people were doing it willingly. The Vaishyas should be doing it willingly. Nobody should be kind of forcing them to do it. But not because nobody's forcing, they should not give it up either. So at any rate, that kind of puts it into perspective. It's interesting. So anyway, in Bhagavad Gita, it is recommended that even though one enters the renounced order of life, he still cannot give up the performance of yajna, dana, and tapasya. This Vedic culture is completely different. in this modern culture, people are totally trying to avoid tapasya and yajna and dana, which is service. They're trying to avoid all these things and just enjoy. The paradigm is opposite, basically. So this ain't going to happen unless a lot of people are converted. Or the thing collapses, I don't know. They are never to be given up. Tapasya is meant for the renounced order of life. Those who are retired from worldly activities should perform tapasya, penance, and austerities. Those who are in the material world, the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas, must give it charity. Brahmacharis in the beginning of their lives should perform different kinds of yajna. Dhruva Maharaj, as an ideal king, practically emptied his treasury by giving charity. A king is not meant to A king is not meant simply to realize taxes from the citizens and accumulate wealth to spend in sense gratification. World monarchy has failed ever since kings began to satisfy their personal senses with the taxes accumulated from the citizens. Of course, whether the system is monarchy or democracy, the same corruption is still going on. At the present moment, there are different parties in the democratic government, but everyone is busy trying to keep his post or trying to keep his political party in power. The politicians have very little time to think of the welfare of the citizens, whom they oppress with heavy taxes in the form of income taxes, sales tax, and many other taxes. People sometimes have 80 to 90% of their income taken away, and these taxes are lavishly spent for high salaries drawn by officers and rulers. Formerly, the taxes accumulated from the citizens were spent for performing great sacrifices as enjoined in Vedic literature. At the present moment, however, all forms of sacrifice are not at all possible. Therefore, it is recommended in the Shastras that people should perform Sankirtan Yajna. Any householder, regardless of his position, can perform the Sankirtan Yajna without expenditure. All family members can sit down together and simply clap their hands and chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Somehow or other, everyone can manage to perform such a yajna and distribute prasadam to the people in general. That is quite sufficient for this age of Kali. The Krishna consciousness movement is based on this principle. Chant the Hare Krishna mantra at every moment, as much as possible, both inside and outside of the temples, and, as far as possible, distribute prasad. This process can be accelerated with the cooperation of state administrators and those who are producing the country's wealth. Simply by liberal distribution of prasad and sankirtan, the whole world can become peaceful and prosperous. Generally, in the material sacrifices recommended in the Vedic literature, there are offerings to the demigods. This demigod worship is especially meant for less intelligent men. Actually, the result of such sacrifice goes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayan. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 5:29, you know that verse? Bhoktaram yagya tapasam. He is actually the enjoyer of all sacrifices. His name, therefore, is Yagya Purusha. Although Dhruva Maharaj was a great devotee, he had nothing to do with these sacrifices. To set an example to his people, he performed many sacrifices and gave all his wealth in charity. He gave it all. For as long as he lived as a householder, he never spent a farthing for his sense gratification. In this verse, the word karma palapradam is very significant. The Lord awards everyone different kinds of karma as the individual living entities desire. He is the supersoul present within everyone, within the heart of everyone. And he is so kind and liberal that he gives everyone full facility to perform whatever acts one wants. Then the result of the action is also enjoyed by the living entity. If anyone wants to enjoy or lord it over material nature, the Lord gives him full facilities, but he becomes entangled in the resultant reactions. Similarly, if anyone wants to engage himself fully in devotional service, the Lord gives him full facilities, and the devotee enjoys the results. The Lord is therefore known as Karma Palaprada. Text 11. Dhruva Maharaj rendered devotional service unto the Supreme, the reservoir of everything, with unrelenting force. While carrying out his devotional service to the Lord, he could see that everything is situated in him only, and that he is situated in all living entities, the Lord, that is. The Lord is called Achyuta because he never fails in his prime duty to give protection to his devotees. Oh, that's his primary duty. Purport. Not only did Dhruva Maharaj perform many sacrifices, but he carried on his transcendental occupation of engagement in the devotional service of the Lord. The ordinary karmis who want to enjoy the results of fruitive activities are concerned only with sacrifices and ritualistic ceremonies as enjoined in the Vedic Shastras. Although Dhruva Maharaj performed many sacrifices in order to be an exemplary king, he was constantly engaged in devotional service. The Lord always protects his surrendered devotee. A devotee can see that the Lord is situated in everyone's heart, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara sarvabhutanam hrideshya arjuna tishtati. Ordinary persons cannot understand how the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, but a devotee can actually see him. Not only can the devotee see him outwardly, but he can see with spiritual vision that everything is resting in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as described in Bhagavad Gita, Matstani Sarvabhutani. That is the vision of a Mahabhagavata. He sees everything others see, but instead of seeing merely the trees, the mountains, the cities, or the sky, he sees only his worshipable Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything, because everything is resting in him only. This is the vision of the Mahabhagavat. In summary, a Mahabhagavata, a highly elevated, pure devotee, sees the Lord everywhere, as well as within the heart of everyone. This is possible for devotees who have developed elevated devotional service to the Lord. As stated in the Brahma Samhita 538, Premanjana Trita Bhakti Valochanena, only those who have smeared their eyes with the ointment of love of Godhead can see everywhere the Supreme Lord face to face. It is not possible by imagination or so-called meditation. Okay, text 12. Dhruva Maharaj was endowed with all godly qualities. He was very respectful to the devotees of the Supreme Lord and very kind to the poor and innocent. He protected religious principles. With all these qualifications, he was considered to be the direct father of all the citizens. Purport. The personal qualities of Dhruva Maharaj described herein are the exemplary qualities of a saintly king. Not only a king, but also the leaders of a modern democratic or impersonal government must be qualified with all these godly characteristics. Then the citizens of the state can be happy. It is clearly stated here that the citizens thought of Dhruva Maharaj as their father. As a child, depending upon an able father, is completely satisfied. So the citizens of the state, being protected by the state or the king, should remain satisfied in every respect. At the present moment, however, there is no guarantee by the government of even the primary necessities of life in the state, namely the protection of the lives and property of the citizens. Well, I don't know, I'd like to talk to Prabhupada about that, because it is, in the United States there is a law to protect people's rights. Maybe he's painting with a large brush, but that's an essential thing for having a free state, that the government can't just come and take your property. And this is the Fourth Amendment. But the other thing that comes to mind is I did a little reading about Abraham Lincoln, and there's a great sentiment amongst a good many people about Abraham Lincoln as kind of like the father, everyone's father, because he was so sober and he was so humble, and he was so wise as people saw him and experienced him, that there was this feeling of Father Lincoln sort of thing. Interesting. And he did write in some of his letters, at the end of his letters, he would do the same thing we do as devotees. He would say, "Your humble servant." I thought that was pretty cool. So one word is very significant in this connection: Brahmanyam. Dhruva Maharaj was very devoted to the Brahmanas, who engage in the study of the Vedas and thereby know the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are always busy propagating Krishna consciousness. The state should be very respectful to societies that distribute God consciousness all over the world, but unfortunately at the present moment there is no state or government support given to such movements. As for good qualities, it is very difficult to find anyone in state administration with any good qualities. Boy, that's a fact. The administrators simply sit in their administrative posts and say no to every request, as if they were paid to say no to the citizens. Another word, Dina Vatsalam, is very significant also. The state head should be very kind to the innocent. Unfortunately, in this age, the state agents and the presidents draw good salaries from the state, and they pose themselves as very pious. But they allow the running of slaughterhouses where innocent animals are killed. What to speak of all the abortion? If we try to compare the godly qualities of Dhruva Maharaj to the qualities of modern statesmen, we can see that there is no actual comparison. Dhruva Maharaj was present in the Satya-yuga, as will be clear from the next verses. He was the ideal king in Satya-yuga. The government administration in the present age, Kali-yuga, is bereft of all godly qualities. Considering all these points, the people today have no alternative but to take to Krishna consciousness for protection of religion, life, and property. Protection of religion, life, and property. That's so interesting. That's very like constitutionalist sounding language. It's very interesting. Text 13. Dhruva Maharaj ruled over this planet for 36,000 years. He diminished the reaction of pious activities by enjoyment and by practicing austerities, he diminished inauspicious reactions. Purport. That Dhruva Maharaj ruled over the planet for 36,000 years means that he was present in the Satya-yuga, because in the Satya-yuga people used to live for 100,000 years. In the next yuga, Treta, people lived for 10,000 years, and then in the next yuga, Dvarpa, for 1,000 years, and in the present age, the Kali-yuga, the maximum duration of life is 100 years, generally. With the change of the yugas, the duration of life and memory, the quality of kindness, and all other good qualities diminish. There are two kinds of activities, namely pious and impious. By executing pious activities, one can gain facilities for higher material enjoyment, but due to impious activities, one has to undergo severe distress. A devotee, however, is not interested in enjoyment or affected by distress. When he is prosperous, he knows, I am diminishing the results of my pious activities. And when he is in distress, he knows, I am diminishing the reactions of my impious activities. So either way, devotee's happy, because without any pious activities and without any impious activities and their resultant karma coming to act on you, then you're close to liberation. So a devotee is not concerned with enjoyment or distress. He simply desires to execute devotional service. It is said in the Srimad Bhagavatam that devotional service should be apratiyata, unchecked by the material conditions of happiness or distress. The devotee undergoes processes of austerity, such as observing Ekadashi and similar other fasting days, and refraining from illicit sex life, intoxication, gambling, and meat eating. Thus he becomes purified from the reactions of his past impious life. And because he engages in devotional service, which is the most pious activity, he enjoys life without separate endeavor. Text 14. The self-controlled great soul Dhruva Maharaj thus passed many, many years favorably executing three kinds of worldly activities, namely religiosity, economic development, and satisfaction of all material desires. Thereafter he handed over the charge of the royal throne to his son. Purport. Perfection of materialistic life is suitably attained by the process of observing religious principles. This leads automatically to successful economic development, and thus there is no difficulty in satisfying all material desires. Since Dhruva Maharaj as a king had to keep up his status quo, or would not have been possible to rule over the people in general, he did it perfectly. But as soon as he saw that his son was grown and could take charge of the royal throne, he immediately handed over the charge and retired from all material engagements. So after 36,000 years, he handed over the throne to his son. Wow. So, in Kali Yuga, 36 years? Can you imagine living that long? How many lessons you would be able to learn and how wise you could become? And the fact that he didn't pass over the throne until 36,000 years after he started, because his son had not been grown or wise enough. I don't think that means that people grow really, really, really slowly back then. I think just the standard of what was considered mature was really, really, really high. You know what I mean? That a mature person, so now, it's kind of true when you're not really fully mature until you're like 30 or 36. So just add 3 zeros to that because you go back 3 yugas, and then you have 36,000. So it's comparable. That makes sense. And then after 36,000, after 36,000 of years, you live with Dhruva Maharaj, you learn from him, and then you'll be qualified to run a kingdom in Satya Yuga. That's how elevated human beings used to be. I think that's really cool. So purport. Wait. Okay, continue the purport. One word used here is very significant. Avichalendriyaha. Indriya means senses. I wonder what the rest. Which means that he was not disturbed by the agitation of the senses, nor was his sensory power diminished, although in years he was a very old man. Since he ruled over the world for 36,000 years, naturally one may conclude that he became very, very old, but factually his senses were very young, and yet he was not interested in sense gratification. In other words, he remained self-controlled. He performed his duties perfectly according to the materialistic way. That is the way of behavior of great devotees. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, one of the direct disciples of Lord Chaitanya, was the son of a very rich man. Although he had no interest in enjoying material happiness, when he was entrusted with doing something in managing the state, he did it perfectly. Srila Gaur Sundar advised him, "From within, keep yourself and your mind completely aloof, but externally execute the material duties just as they need to be done." Unquote. It's good advice for us all. This transcendental position can be achieved by devotees only, as described in Bhagavad Gita, while others, such as yogis, try to control their senses by force. Devotees, even though possessing full sensory powers, do not use them because they engage in higher transcendental activities. Here it's good to insert that Govinda means one who satisfies the senses. So devotees can achieve this state of being aloof internally, but still doing our duties, because we chant our rounds in the morning. We read. By contact with Krishna, our senses become unhinged or unhooked from within material nature. Then we're able to move freely within material nature without being pulled, being attracted to anything within it. So it's not, in one sense, I mean, it's an instruction, and then you can keep that in mind. But this instruction is not exactly realized without good sadhana. You can intellectualize it all you want, but unless you make the attempt to connect to the transcendental platform and actually purify yourself, you'll struggle. That's why devotees don't struggle with this sort of thing, because devotees actually render devotional service. There's no meaning to a devotee without any devotional service, right? And devotional service in the form of hearing and chanting is legitimate, is the main fundamental way of doing devotional service. Text 15. Srila Dhruva Maharaj realized that this cosmic manifestation bewilders living entities like a dream or phantasmagoria, because it is a creation of the illusory external energy of the Supreme Lord. Purport. In the deep forest it sometimes appears that there are big palaces and nice cities. That is technically called Kandaranagara. Similarly, in dreams also we create many false things out of imagination. A self-realized person, or a devotee, knows well that this material cosmic manifestation is a temporary, illusory representation appearing to be truth. It is like a phantasmagoria, but behind this shadow creation there is reality, the spiritual world. A devotee is interested in the spiritual world, not its shadow. Since he has realization of the supreme truth, a devotee is not interested in this temporary shadow of truth. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Param Drishtva Nivartante. Text 16. Thus Dhruva Maharaj at the end left his kingdom, which extended all over the earth and was bounded by the great oceans. He considered his body, his wives, his children, his friends, his army, his rich treasury, his very comfortable palaces, and his many enjoyable pleasures to be the creations of the illusory energy. Thus, in due course of time, he retired to the forest in the Himalayas, known as Bhadragashram. Purport. In the beginning of his life, when he went to the forest in search of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Dhruva Maharaj realized that all bodily conceptions of pleasure are products of the illusory energy. In the very beginning, of course, he was after the kingdom of his father, and in order to get it, he went to search for the Supreme Lord. But he later realized that everything is the creation of the illusory energy. From the acts of Srila Dhruva Maharaj, we can understand that somehow or other, if one becomes Krishna conscious, it does not matter what his motivation is in the beginning. He will eventually realize the real truth by the grace of the Lord. In the beginning, Dhruva Maharaj was interested in the kingdom of his father, but later he became a great devotee. Mahabhagavat, and had no interest in material enjoyment. The perfection of life can be achieved only by devotees. Even if one completes only a minute percentage of devotional service, and then falls down from his immature position, he is better than a person who fully engages in the fruitive activities of this material world. As a verse in the first canto. Text 17. In Bhadrak Ashram, Dhruva Maharaj's senses became completely purified because he bathed regularly in the crystal clear purified water. He fixed his sitting position and by yogic practice controlled the breathing process and the air of life. In this way his senses were completely withdrawn. Then he concentrated his mind on the Archa-vigraha form of the Lord, which is the exact replica of the Lord, and, thus meditating upon him, entered into complete trance. Purport. Here is a description of the Ashtanga Yoga system, to which Dhruva Maharaj was already accustomed. Ashtanga Yoga was never meant to be practiced in a fashionable city. Dhruva Maharaj went to Bhadrak Ashram, and in a solitary place alone he practiced yoga. He concentrated his mind on the Archa-vigraha, the worshipable deity of the Lord, which exactly represents the Supreme Lord. And thus thinking constantly of that deity, he became absorbed in trance. Worship of the Archa-vigraha is not idol worship. The Archa-vigraha is an incarnation of the Lord in the form of in any form appreciable by a devotee. Therefore devotees engage in the temple in the service of the Lord as Archa-vigraha. A form made of stula material, a form made of stula material objects such as stone, metal, wood, jewels, or paint. All these are called stula, or physical representations. Since the devotees follow the regulative principles of worship, even though the Lord is there in his physical form, he is non-different from his original spiritual form. 1 second, I'm going to cough. Sorry about that. Where were we? So, even though the Lord is there in his physical form, he is non-different from his original spiritual form. Thus the devotee gets the benefit of achieving the ultimate goal of life, that is to say, becoming always absorbed in thought of the Lord. This incessant thought of the Lord, as prescribed in the Bhagavad Gita, makes one the topmost yogi. Let's see how much we got more on this chapter. Oh, it's a long chapter. I'll read one more verse and purport, because the next purport's pretty long. And then, if people are interested, I'd like to hear people's realizations in the voice chat room in Discord. So let's read this last one. Text 18. Because of this transcendental bliss, incessant tears flowed from his eyes, his heart melted, and there was shivering and standing of hairs all over his body. Thus transformed, in a trance of devotional service, Dhruva Maharaj completely forgot his bodily existence, and thus he immediately became liberated from material bondage. This is a great illustration. This is how one forgets their bodily existence. It only comes by devotional trance, or by when one is feeling this transcendental ecstasy. Because the contrast then becomes obvious. We're in these bodies and they're just miserable half the time. But if you're constantly overwhelmed with spiritual ecstatic blissfulness, you're definitely going to feel like that's not your body. So the feeling blissful is the essential thing. So anyway, purport. Due to constant engagement in devotional service, hearing, chanting, remembering, worshipping the deity, etc., as prescribed in 9 varieties, there are different symptoms which appear in the body of a devotee. These 8 bodily transformations, which indicate that a devotee is already liberated within himself, are called Ashtasattvika Vikara. When a devotee completely forgets his bodily existence, he should be understood to be liberated. He is no longer encaged in the body. The example is given that when a coconut becomes completely dry, the coconut pulp within the coconut shell separates from the bondage of the shell and the outer covering. By moving the dry coconut, one can hear that the pulp within is no longer attached to the shell or to the covering. Similarly, when one is fully absorbed in devotional service, he is completely disconnected from the 2 material coverings, the subtle and gross bodies. Dhruva Maharaj actually attained this stage of life by constantly discharging devotional service. He has already been described as Mahabhagavat, for unless one becomes a Mahabhagavat, or a first-class pure devotee, these symptoms are not visible. Lord Chaitanya exhibited all these symptoms. Thakur Haridas also exhibited them, and there are many pure devotees who manifested such bodily symptoms. They are not to be imitated, but when one is actually advanced, these symptoms are exhibited. At that time, it is to be understood that a devotee is materially free. Of course, from the beginning of devotional service, the path of liberation immediately opens, just as the coconut taken from the tree immediately begins to dry. It simply takes time for the shell and pulp to separate from one another. An important word used in this verse is mukta linga. Mukta means liberated, and linga means the subtle body. When a man dies, he quits his gross body, but the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego carries him to a new body, a new gross body. While existing in the present body, the same subtle body carries him from one stage of life to another, for example, from childhood to boyhood, by mental development. The mental condition of a baby is different from that of a boy. The mental condition of a boy is different from that of a young man, and the mental condition of a young man is different from that of an old man. So at death, the process of changing bodies takes place due to the subtle body. The mind, intelligence, and ego carry the soul from one gross body to another. This is called transmigration of the soul. But there is another stage where one becomes liberated even from the subtle body. At that time, the living entity is competent and fully prepared to be transferred to the transcendental or spiritual world. The description of the bodily symptoms of Sri Dhruva Maharaj makes it apparent that he became perfectly fit to be transferred to the spiritual world. One can experience the distinction between the subtle and gross bodies even daily. In a dream, one's gross body is lying on the bed while the subtle body carries the soul, the living entity, to another atmosphere. But because the gross body has to be continued, the subtle body comes back and settles in the present gross body. Therefore, one has to become free from the subtle body also. This freedom is known as Muktalinga. So it's about an hour. I'm going to stop there. Thank you for participating. I hope everyone who's here is interested in coming and sharing their realizations in the chat. Here is a link. If you don't have Discord, it's pretty easy to get on. You just have to set up your account and email, password, have a microphone. Hope you guys will join me over there and share what you liked about the reading and what it made you think of, and just nice to continue Krishna Katha. So thank you so much. I really appreciate people coming out to listen, and I appreciate everyone who's listening afterwards. Post comments below. That would be neat too. It's just inspiring for me, and I always feel purified, so much more purified after reading the Bhagavatam. So this is a nice way to do it, despite all of our individual lives and hectic schedules. This is a great way for me to read the Bhagavatam and for people to hear the Bhagavatam at our own leisure, because we're not all on the same schedules, so it's good. Okay, thank you very much. Hope to see you over in Discord. Hare Krishna.